thoughts on the All-Star Game, rest of season projections, a look around the NL West, and much, much more. Derek Van Riper of The Athletic joins us next on Beat the Shift. Welcome to another episode of the Beat the Shift podcast presented by Fangraphs. I am your host, Ariel Cohen, and with me as always is Ruvain Guy. How are you, Ruvain?
I'm doing great. How are you doing today?
I'm doing great. Well, I told you last week we won the Tuesday softball championship. Wednesday night, we won. It was a no-doubter. We were up 8-1. We just pounded them from the start. And what a great 2 weeks of softball. I also telling the guys that I played in a Central Park tournament for my office. My office is in a insurance tournament every year, and we were doing well. We had 2 wins, and then it poured, thunderstorm. I completely soaked, but a fun couple of days, fun couple of weeks playing softball. How are you doing, Ruvain?
I'm doing well. Most of my softball games have been rained out, so it's hard to get to the championship if you don't play enough games.
Well, we have someone on the line here, our guest today, who claims that he hasn't seen rain since April. We got Derek Van Riper from The Athletic. So glad to have you on the show. And what's this? No, you don't know, you haven't seen rain in a couple of months? What?
Yeah, it's part of being in the Bay Area. It's a little unnerving, actually. I thought I would love never seeing rain, but in my first full year of living in this climate, it actually scares me a little bit. So I would be happy for a storm to shake things up.
Yeah, I was looking at the continental U.S. and looking at the high temperatures for the day all over the U.S., 90, 85. And the one point where it's like 60s, San Francisco, like upper 60s. Isn't that crazy?
Oh, yeah. That's the beauty of it, right? As long as the place doesn't just burn, it's going to be consistently nice here more often than not.
Yeah, good stuff. You're enjoying living in the Bay Area? I know you moved from the Midwest, I should say.
Yeah, it's been good to me so far, and looking forward to doing it for at least one more year. I think it's at least a 2-year stop on the professional track for my family.
All right, sounds good. Well, you can hear Derek Van Riper over at The Athletic, does a lot of amazing podcasts, does Rates and Barrels with Eno Saris, does the Athletic Fantasy Baseball podcast, and there's a bunch of different shows on there. Definitely a fantastic host, and today you get to relax a little bit. You get to be the guest, and I guess you leave us to be the hosting. And before we talk about some of our strategy and other stuff, the All-Star Game was this past week, and just curious to hear your thoughts. I personally thought that the mic'd up sections were unbelievable. Alek Manoah, that inning, hearing him talk with Smoltz, what am I going to throw? Yeah, that's a good suggestion, John. No, I'm going to go with the heater. I thought that was unbelievable. What do you think?
Loved it. At first, when that interview started, I was nervous that Manoah wasn't really going to say anything, just because I imagine when you're pitching, even in a showcase game, your focus has to be really high, right? You're exerting a lot of energy on every pitch, and I just think it's one of those things that is more difficult to do than having the earpiece in playing first base or even playing out in the outfield. So I'm glad they tried it. I don't know if it's the kind of thing we'll ever see in games that count, but I thought it was really cool to see more of Manoah's personality, too. Just getting a feel for that. I mean, get that last strikeout, struck out the side, jumped off the mound and was walking off saying 3 punchies, and I just thought that was really cool, too. I thought David Ortiz running through the AL dugout at one point was pretty funny. I think we'd see more Poppy on the field. I think that'd be a feature as well if they were able to do that more often.
Yeah, a lot of fun stuff. And I thought that, Manoah is the pitcher and he controls the action. So I would almost think it would be easier to do the mic'd up sections because you say, all right, what am I going to throw? You wait and you know when you're going to pitch. If you're an outfielder, I mean, the ball's going to come at any moment, right? You if you're in the middle of a sentence talking to the studio, you sort of have to break and because you don't know when it's going to come to you. You never know.
Well, Nestor Cortez and Jose Trevino also were mic'd up, and you saw they were communicating through the microphones, and they weren't putting down signs until the microphone stopped working for a bit, and then they had to put down and then go back to the regular signs. But you saw it was just it's interesting hearing how the pitcher thinks and how the catcher. Well, he didn't shake him off at all. But if the catcher would have shaken him off, that would have been very interesting to see. But obviously, they're both all stars. I never thought Jose Trevino would ever be an all star, but I guess he is. And Nestor Cortez, I mean, he's just. I think it has to be the personality, of the person to. Of the player to do it to actually be mic'd up, because I can never see Roger Clemens being mic'd up for an All Star game.
Yeah. And Trevino had a hit, and he was mic'd up during that hit. That was pretty cool. They changed the rules this year, and if the game would have been tied after 9 innings, they wouldn't be playing a 10th. They would actually be having a home run derby to end it. Each team would pick 3 players. Each would get 3 swings, and whoever has the most at the end would win. If they're all tied, then they go to it's almost like a shootout. The next player goes. What do you think of those new rules of home run derby tied to the All-Star game, Derek?
I like that better than letting the game end in a tie for sure.
Yeah.
I mean, I kind of want to see it to get a better feel for it. I think it'd be a very modified version of the Derby compared to the current format that I think has really taken off the last couple of years. That head-to-head bracket, the timed segments, I think that's really well done. I look forward to watching the Derby just as much as I look forward to actually watching the All-Star game at this point.
Yeah, the Derby is so much better with the new rules, and it sort of came by accident because I remember it was in Cincinnati, and the only reason why they did it was there was some weather in the area, and they knew they had to go quicker, so they had to time everybody, and so they changed it just for that, and it is so much better. It's exciting, it's engaging, and you don't have players who, if you hit 25 homers, well, you keep going, you don't know when to stop. Here, it's easy. You just go until the clock runs out. Really, really love it. Any other thoughts on the home run derby or anything in the All-Star game? Pete Alonso didn't win, so we're kind of disappointed here in New York.
Well, I really don't like the fact that it would end in a home run derby. It'd be interesting, but I'm such a purist. I don't like that whatsoever. They should just keep playing. They should allow the pitchers to come back in if they want to, or even have position players pitch. I mean, they pitch in the regular season anyway, so why not have the position players pitch then?
Yeah, I guess you're the purist there. Listen, they used to play. People in the All-Star game used to play all 9 innings. It was a really big deal. Only later, in most recent years, you play a couple of innings and then you're out. You get your 2 at bats, you're done, and everybody gets changed. I mean, I remember watching games where like Tony Gwynn, and they're not taking Tony Gwynn out. He's gonna hit in the 10th inning, and he's the starter. They really, really used to. Go all out. So it's a little bit different game, but I do like the home run derby. You know what I do think they should do, though, is the futures game gets absolutely no attention. I don't know why. They should just extend the whole All-Star weekend, the whole All-Star week, and make it the Wednesday. Make the futures game on Wednesday and televise it nationally. Like, why wouldn't you want to promote your sport?
Yeah, I think there's been a few different ideas that have floated out there. I think it was Mike Farron from SiriusXM, the MLB channel, suggesting that you could take the minor league All-Star games and play those on the Wednesday after the All-Star game because it's a day without baseball. So the futures game could fit there. The minor league level All-Star games could fit there. I mean, you could play the futures game on the Sunday night at the time where you normally play Sunday night baseball on the Sunday going into the break, and at least then it wouldn't have the same day as the celebrity softball game, which apparently is part of the reason why they've been cutting off the futures game at 7 innings, which is kind of ridiculous. There are a lot of guys that pitched in that game that didn't even get a full inning. I mean, it's really hard to appreciate a young player when they come in and throw 3 pitches or 1 pitch. I mean, that's just absurd.
Yeah, I mean, the celebrity softball game to me is so idiotic. And I apologize if you enjoy watching it, but they don't even show the whole game. They just show clips of the game, and it has no meaning. It's just idiotic. I'll tell you, I can't even sit through it. I just won't.
And that's coming from someone who plays a lot of softball too.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, it's terrible. All right, on to real baseball stuff. Talk a little bit of strategy as we start each day. There was a tout table for all the touts of Tout Wars asking, what do you do during the All-Star break? So it's half the season. You get a little bit of a break. What are you doing, Derek, during these 3 games? Are you missing the games? Are you taking stock of the year? Are you going through all your teams and saying, all right, what trades do I have to do? What are you doing these days?
A lot of times I've been doing the things people would do during the All-Star break for the better part of the last 4 to 6 weeks. I've been evaluating teams on the fly, trying to make sure that I have good categorical balance, that if I'm in a league where I can make trades, that I've already started to figure out how I'm going to get better in the categories or at the positions where I need to get better. So I think because I'm already on it for the most part, I'm not doing as much in-depth prep during the All-Star break. I use it as a good time to take a little break from the routine. As much as I miss having baseball on the Wednesday after the All-Star game, yesterday I literally sat there and was just looking around on YouTube TV. I'm like, there's not a game on right now. What do I watch? And I watched a bunch of game shows instead because apparently that's my go-to when there's no baseball. So it's just an opportunity for me to unplug. I think for people that don't get to do this full time, maybe it is a great opportunity to do the deep dive on your roster, but also the rosters of your competitors too. Because I think part of what makes you a good trader is taking the time to find out what other teams in your league need, figure out how you can help them while also helping yourself. So the break in the action is a really good time to do that.
For sure. Ruvain?
I actually look and see what I did or didn't do wrong during the draft and see why my team is not doing well, or why my team is doing well, and how I can sustain it. This is the time of year when you, at this point, you should know whether or not you're in the race for your league championship. If you don't know it at this point and you still have an opportunity to win, then it's still, you don't know if you had a successful draft, you had a successful pre-draft preparation, everything like that. But you should know if your team is not going to be well. What did I do wrong? What can I improve? Can I fix it in season? Is there something that I can work on? Should I change my strategy? Should I try something different this year just because I'm out of it, because I want to try something different just because?
Yeah, I'll take the couple days to look at each team and say, okay, what trades can I make to help the team? Are there any weird strategies? Should I be punting some categories? Should I be throwing all 2-star pitchers? Just deciding on the game plan you're going to do for the next couple of months. You definitely don't want to wait until August to do this. You should be doing this early July. So it's a good 3-day opportunity. For me, also, for this particular year, I started doing ATC rest of season projections. Those numbers are actually over at Fangraphs. They're not up on the site. I gave it into them. They have to somehow get it up in the data system. So hopefully in the next couple of days, you'll be able to take a look at ATC rest of season projections. And, speaking of that, Derek, I know that you take a look at projections quite a bit on your show. You're always looking at stuff. What sources do you use to evaluate players down the stretch? Are you looking at rest of season projections? Are you looking at other people's rankings? Like, how do you form your own opinions about players' rest of season?
Yeah, that's the main way I go about it. Rest of season projections. I like using the Fangraphs auction calculator tool because any projections that are available there that have a rest of season set can go into that tool, and that just gives you a really good idea of what players' value looks like the rest of the way and gives you a good guide for what makes sense trade-wise. I think there's enough movement in player values from draft day back in March and early April to now where you don't want to make a big mistake because you estimated incorrectly. So I think having better guidelines for what fair value looks like, how much some players have moved up, how much others have moved down is really important to have. I've also found this year that the Razzball Trade Analyzer is also a pretty good tool you can use to drop a couple players into a deal and just get a feel for how balanced the trade would be. So those two tools in conjunction are pretty important to me this time of year.
Yeah. And for you, Ruvain, question to you is, beginning of the season, we have preseason projections, and even a month into the season, you really do rely on that as well, unless there's a playing time change. At this point in the season, are you more looking at the preseason numbers? Are you looking at rest of season projections? Do you look into what they've been doing year to date? And what is your general timeline for switching over? Like, do you say, all right, after 2 months now I'm switching gears? Like, how do you change what you're basing your value on as you go through a season?
I think we should stop looking at the projections like around June 1st, or the first week in June. And at this point, there's no reason to look at the projections because players have changed already. Teams have adjusted. The game plans for how you pitch a certain player is completely changing now. Rookies who are doing good, they're going to be adjusted to, and we're going to see how they're going to readjust back from how the pitchers are going to now pitch them. So I think at this point, what you see is what you get. You're not going to have a guy who's going to find a new salsa and just also be really good. Oh wait, that happened. But still, it doesn't happen that often. It's very, very rare. So what you see is what you get, and I think you can just assess based on how things are going, and you can see, you know what, this guy's trending this way, this guy's trending that way. But I'm looking at the one thing that I look at is projections. If I do look at anything, I'll look at the projection of innings for pitchers because I want to see exactly how many were projected and how where the certain pitchers are because you can learn a lot and you can know how much of a leash you still have left for some of these pitchers.
So, same question to you, Derek, but also, if you're gonna, I don't know if you look at recent performance. Like I know for pitchers, I know Ruvain looks at past 3 starts a lot. Do you look at a recent performance like last week, last month, and if so, like what is your general guideline for how much time you look at the recent? Like what's the threshold of time?
Usually I'm looking at the last 30 days if I want a snapshot, and I'm using the stats I see from a time frame like that to then push me toward further research into the player. So if we're talking about a pitcher, we can look at something like Eno Sarris's pitching model and see if stuff actually got better. We can look at the Baseball Savant player page and just see if the pitch mix changed at all or if there was a velocity increase. And you can obviously do this the other way and see if there was a drop in velo or anything that would be maybe an indication that a player is either hurt or just having some other kind of issue that they're working through. So I do think recent performance is part of the calculus for me all the time. I mean, obviously with StatCast too, we're looking at all sorts of different things for hitters, and the rolling graphs on Fangraphs are probably the other thing that I like to look at to get a longer view of what's going on, because I think it's easy, even when you're looking at any given month or a half of a season, to think that what you see is more real than it really is. And if you can look at it on a 3, 4, 5 year chart and say, oh, actually, we've never seen Justin Turner play this poorly for this long of a stretch, it gives you a better sense of overall decline. And I think that's been a relatively new tool. I know those have been around for a while, but I've been using those more and more this season than I have in years past, just to get a better sense for drop-offs and possible new levels in the other direction. I think Taylor Ward might be a really good example of a player that's just completely different than he was, or at least than we thought he was when the season began.
How do you know when a player who is underperforming is injured? Like, can you get a sense from rolling graphs or maybe luck metrics or something where a player is doing poorly, but it's sometimes it's hard to tell whether it's real decline or whether it's literally injury. Like, how do you decipher one from the other?
If I see something that has changed a lot, like velo for a pitcher or for a hitter, maybe it'd be a sharp increase in ground ball percentage. That's a pretty weird thing to change, right? If you're a 40-45% career ground ball rate hitter and all of a sudden you're hitting the ball on the ground 55 to 60% of the time, let's see what's going on. You can go back through player updates. You might find there's a shoulder injury. You might find there's a back injury. You might find there's absolutely nothing on that player's injury ledger whatsoever, because sometimes guys play even though they're hurt. They don't go on the IL. We don't get much of a report of something being wrong. Other times it's something like a hit by pitch, and again, not an IL stint, maybe not even time missed, and suddenly you can kind of see, oh wait, ever since that guy got hit in the hand by that pitch, the performance is just down. And then you can sort of say, okay, what normally happens? Guys get hit in the hand, takes a few weeks to heal. Maybe the All-Star break is actually the perfect opportunity for a player who's dealing with a nagging injury like that to shake it off, because they're not out there for a few days taking an injury and kind of making it worse by continuing to play through it.
Yeah. What do you do, Ruvain?
Well, it's very hard to tell because most players do play through it. We found out last year that Pete Alonso was playing through an injured wrist. He got hit by a pitch and he played through it, didn't go on the IL. We waited to go on the IL. Then he finally went on the IL. So it's very hard to tell because a lot, especially the elite players, they want to be out there. They want to play. They have the hunger. They want to do it. It's just so hard to tell. You can tell from different ways they go about doing what they're doing, whether they're changing their mechanics a little bit, maybe their swing is a little bit different, maybe they're more aggressive at the plate because they want to be aggressive because they can't stay at the plate for a long time because it hurts when they swing. There can be many different things. It's just so hard to tell. The only way you really know is if they eventually get put on the IL, and by that point it's already too late.
Yeah, I think the key word is sharp. is that when you see a player profile and you see his components and what he's doing and the StatCast numbers and the barrel rate and any kind of component, and all of a sudden it's very sharply different. You mentioned ground ball rate. Well, if a player is 40%, all of a sudden it's 60%. Anything sharp is always an indication that something's not right. When you have a decline, it usually goes up a little bit. There's a trend, right? Trend versus sharpness will give you a little bit of a bifurcation. So that's something always to take a look at. Unfortunately, it's all a manual process to look at, right? You got to do a deep dive on everyone. If you want to find out, there's no one number or one source that you can look. You actually have to go investigate and look at all of his stuff. What did he do before? What did he do after? And it's a little bit of research. And of course, even if after you do all that, you may or may not be right. I mean, it might be decline where you think it's an injury or vice versa. You can't always get it right, but those are some tools to help you with it. And obviously, if you can identify it properly, you can know whether to invest in a guy or just to sell or to buy and so on and so forth. All right, so on this show, we're going to be going through the NL West. It's our last of our Around the Major League Baseball divisions episodes. So, Derek, I know that you're not exactly an NL West fan. You just live there now, but hey, figured you can come and help us with that.
Sure, happy to help.
All right, let's start with the Diamondbacks. A couple of exciting players coming along the way. One of them is Corbin Carroll. He just started AAA so far in his first 15 at-bats. 2 homers, 3 stolen bases, batting .267. So far, so good for him. I kind of think Corbin Carroll, if the team really needed him, he could be up this year. But the question is, will he be? He's certainly a dynasty gold. He could be up next year. Well, what's your take on when the Diamondbacks are going to bring him up, and what's the probability that he'll be up this year?
I think it's more likely than not we see him opening day of 2023. He's very young for the level, and he missed most of last season with a major injury. And had that not happened, Corbin Carroll might be a big leaguer right now. But I think just based on the trajectory of this team, they can reasonably afford to say, let's just see how he does with a half season at Reno. He's probably going to put up ridiculous numbers there. It's a very hitter-friendly league, but that's one of the most hitter-friendly environments in that hitter-friendly league. There's power, there's speed, there's a very good understanding of the strike zone. I think the only thing that I'm even remotely worried about in the short term is the K rate could jump once he eventually does become a big leaguer. But Corbin Carroll, to me, looks like the kind of guy that's going to be a 30-30 player at his peak. So we're talking about an early first-round fantasy pick at his peak, and that could be sooner than you think. I mean, that's that type of talent I think we're talking about.
Yeah, oh, no doubt. What's your take, Ruvain? I tend to agree. I think that he won't be up till next year.
Yeah, I don't think he'll be up till next year. I think he's going to be similar to what happened to Bobby Witt Jr. Last year. I think that he's going to be spend the rest of the year. He's going to put up these amazing numbers. We're going to see all these videos on Twitter that he's really, really good, and then he's going to get super hyped. And if in a redraft leagues, and he's going to go very expensive, just like Bobby Witt did. Now, exactly what Derek said. He was injured last year, and 2020 there was almost no minor league system, so he needs some seasoning. Some of these rookies are being brought up too soon. I think. Jared Kelenic, and I think that having this full year of minor league ball under his belt will suit him much better for next year. And the Diamondbacks have no reason to start his clock yet, so I think he is not going to be brought up this year. But if he's available on the waiver wire, and you have keepers, and he's out there, take him now so you can keep him for next year.
Yeah, so I want to use him to really talk a little bit of strategy. One is the this year strategy, and one is what's he going to be in the draft for next year. So in terms of this year, being that we all think that he's probably going to not be up, there's always a chance. Maybe there's a couple of injuries, or who the heck knows. Maybe they trade people and they need a spot. Who knows? What is the strategy of picking him up? Because, if you're in a shallow 10-team league, on the waiver wire, even if he's available, it just doesn't make sense to pick him up. It's too shallow. The probability of him coming up, not enough expected value. Is there a league deep enough that people would play in a home league right now that you really feel that, hey, you got an empty bench spot, Corbin Carroll, if up, is going to be fantastic. just throw a buck on him, put him on your bench, and if he doesn't come up, he doesn't come up. You'll drop him September 10th. Is there a strategy to actually picking him up right now, Derek?
I think for NL only leagues, he's probably already rostered in most competitive NL only leagues, but you have to just consider the possibility that if he does get opportunities for maybe the final 6 to 8 weeks of the season, I mean, that's really pushing it. That's basically the scenario you outlined where they trade David Peralta and say, all right, it's Corbin Carroll time. It still seems very unlikely, but in the unlikely event that it happens, the payoff in a format like that is massive because Corbin Carroll could come up, strike out a third of the time, and still, just because of the power-speed combo and the counting stats, be much better than the typical player you're going to find on the wire in an NL-only league 2 weeks from now. So I think in leagues that deep, it makes sense to stash him. The harder thing, I think, is to decide if you play in a league where, let's just say, it's a 12-team league and every team can keep 6 players. And it's not about minor leaguers at all. It's just any 6 players you want. If we think Corbin Carroll is going to be treated like Bobby Witt Jr. was this draft season, is it worth it, depending on your keeper situation, to pick Corbin Carroll up now, keep him as your 6th keeper, and hopefully have him find success quickly, and then obviously he's one of your core 6 keepers beyond this season as well? I think those are the leagues where I think you have a more difficult decision to make.
Right. And that also begs the question for, will he be overdrafted in 2023? You know, we saw where Bobby Witt was drafted. I don't know if he returned the value that he was drafted in. He certainly kept up the steals part, maybe not enough the power, but I think you were somewhat satisfied by buying him this year. O'Neal Cruz, you weren't because he wasn't up. But do you think that in 2023 drafts, Derek, do you think that he's going to be overvalued, or people are just going to say, oh my God, he's probably going to be up and he's going to be stellar and let's pick him in the 7th round? Are you going to be picking him in the 7th round? Like, what's your take on what's going to happen and what you would do for the drafts?
I wasn't in on Witt at the price this year because I thought there would be more of a strikeout problem all season long. And I think I'm, at least today in late July, I think I was wrong. I mean, I think the process behind not wanting to take Witt there was that I saw other hitters that I felt were very likely to hit their $20 projections. And I thought Witt, while he could hit it and could exceed it, also had more downside. So I passed because of that. And I think based on the Fangraphs calculator to this point, Witt's been the 5th most valuable shortstop in the pool. Trey Turner, Dansby Swanson, Francisco Lindor, and Tommy Edman, shortstop eligible as well, are the 4 that are ahead of him. Edman's barely ahead. So the position's been a little bit of a disappointment overall. Injuries have been a factor in that. And I would say that after a slow start, Witt has definitely been more on the exceeded expectation side. So I've been wrong so far. I don't know if that means I'm going to change my process. And each player is unique too. So I think if Carroll comes through AAA and is even more productive as a hitter than Witt was at the same level, and he's doing it with a lower K rate, I might be more inclined to take the chance on Corbin Carroll if the prices are similar.
Yeah, Witt is worth about $27 season to date, and it's a lot because of his steals. I mean, the power is okay. He's hit 13 homers, but 17 steals really plays. Not a great batting average, but overall in a rotisserie format, I think people are satisfied. Ruvain, what about you? Do you think that Carroll's going to be drafted in a very similar position, and do you think that you're going to be picking him up at that part? Do you think that the market's overdrafting him? What are your thoughts?
I think I probably would go after him just because of what Bobby Witt does. Because if I can get Corbin Carroll and he can be a top 30 or 40 outfielder right out of the bat, I mean, this is so similar. I mean, okay, if you burn me once and you go after Bobby Witt this year, and he's worth so much, and he's worth more than a whole position that we thought was so deep. We thought the middle infield was so deep this year. I mean, don't you think the people who took Fernando Tatis, even though he was injured, wouldn't they have rather taken Bobby Witt and spent more money there? I mean, there's so many places where it's crazy to think that I'm going to go after a rookie next year. I usually don't go after rookies. Usually in the draft, I don't go after rookies because they have so little return on investment, especially recently because they just don't perform up to what they're capable of. And Bobby Witt, if he had a better lineup, do you know how much more productive he'll be? And do you know how much better he'll probably be once Salvador Perez comes back? His value is going to be through the roof. Same thing with Corbin Carroll. He's going to have a year of Alec Thomas with him. Alec Thomas has been performing very well. He hasn't been. It seems like the pitchers haven't yet adjusted to him completely. And having both of those guys in the outfield, that's a very good 1-2 tandem to have.
Yeah, speaking of Alec Thomas, Derek, do you think the league will figure him out? I mean, so far he's hit 7 homers, 4 stolen bases, 250, pretty decent season, nothing spectacular. Do you think that he will hit a wall and just plummet, or do you think that this is a good level that he can continue going forward?
Yeah, I think this combination of power and speed is reasonable because you're looking at high teens, maybe low 20s homers and 10 to 15 steals, maybe, depending on where the OBP falls. I mean, it's not a surprise that in his first exposure to big league pitching, he's walking a lot less than he did throughout his time in the minors, but he's still walking a little bit, and the strikeout rate hasn't gone through the roof. I mean, to me, that's a pretty big success. I think when a player comes up, especially a young rookie, someone who's 21, 22 years old, and they don't fall on their face, if they're just sort of a league average player, if you look at the WRC Plus and you see something even above 90, like 10% worse than league average, that's actually not bad for a rookie. And if you look at the underlying skills and you like those, and you see a player like Thomas who has a lot of ways to make value, I could see him actually being a little bit underrated potentially going into next season, depending on, of course, what happens in the final 2 months and change.
Yeah, I think your points are excellent there. Definitely, because of his power speed blend. I mean, anytime you hit, you're going to have 10 stolen bases. It's going to be valuable this year, and upwards of 20 homers. That does it. That could be. Do you think that there's a such thing as a sophomore slump? Like, will he hit that wall next year? And the league's figured him out. Is that a real thing in your mind?
Not in a vacuum. I mean, I guess the way I like to think about what people might call a sophomore slump is that hitters and pitchers are always forced to adjust. Teams figure out ways to have success against young players, and young players that are more dynamic or young players that are well coached are going to have more tools they can lean on to make those adjustments. And I think figuring out who makes adjustments quickly is actually one of the more difficult parts of being an analyst. I think it's especially when you're talking about a young hitter. If the hole in someone's approach can be exploited consistently by big league pitching, then it depends on what is that problem. Is it high fastballs? Is it breaking balls out of the zone? I think there's a varying level of an ability to adjust depending on the scope of that problem. If you can't hit big league velocity upon arrival, I don't know how much you can do in most cases to start hitting top end velocity even with more time in the league.
Yeah. Just before we go on to the next team, you mentioned David Peralta. Let's start with Ruvain on this. Who do you think is going to be traded and who has fantasy relevance? David Peralta, I think, is easily the most likely. Maybe some of the bullpen arms, Melanson, Kennedy. What do you think, Ruvain?
I think Peralta will be traded because he's a left-handed hitter. He plays the outfield, and a lot of teams are actually looking for that. I think Melanson will probably be traded, but I don't think he's going to have that much value because I don't think he's going to be the closer. I think he's just going to be a setup man wherever he goes. Another guy who I think is going to be traded, not really that much fantasy value, but that's Caleb Smith. He's a power lefty, and a lot of teams look for lefties, especially at the trade deadline. And the Diamondbacks aren't going anywhere right now, and Caleb Smith is getting up there in age. I think he's 30 or 31. So I think another guy who'll be traded. Listen, if Peralta's traded, you may see a guy like Seth Beer come up and have him play the outfield a little bit, so you may get more playing time like that. But I think any guy in the bullpen is a possibility for trade. I don't think anyone's off limits for the Diamondback team, and I wouldn't be surprised if anyone gets traded.
Anyone to add, Derek?
Yeah, whole pen might be going. I'm kind of curious if they're not going to call up Carroll. Who do they call up to replace that spot on the roster when Peralta goes? I think Beer's among the names that you always think about. I think Cooper Hummel has been kind of interesting for deeper leagues. I'd just be curious to see what would happen if he got more playing time. So it's probably going to be more like an organizational filler type, for lack of a better description, as opposed to a prospect. And sometimes those players could be surprisingly productive for us in short stints.
Let's talk San Francisco Giants. Let's start with Joey Bart. High expectations for the future. he's done fairly well since he came back up. He's batting .276 with 2 homers in the 32 plate appearances since coming back up. He is only batting 9th most days. I always like to look where somebody batting in the lineup. That's not fantastic, but hey, we'll take it. Is he the catcher of the future in your mind, Derek? What are your expectations for him for the rest of this year and in the future?
I think he's probably always going to be a high-volume swing and miss sort of guy that when he connects, gets to the power that we're looking for. And I think at the catcher position, we're used to this. I mean, I think there's probably a Mike Zunino type floor in terms of what he can accomplish. I think generally he's regarded as a good defender, and that drives playing time. But you're always going to look at him and say, yeah, he might hit 210, and it might be a costly way to get to 20 home run power. I do like what he's done since coming back up from Sacramento. The K rate so far for the season has been really high, 43.6%, but I think it's closer to 33% since that demotion. You look at some of the decisions on swinging at pitches outside the zone, it's not bad. And the hard hit rate is consistently good. 48.3% is a hard hit rate you can definitely get excited about. So catcher of the future is still up in the air, but having watched this team a bit in recent weeks especially, it does seem like Bart is starting to embrace more of a leadership role on the club, which, again, I think bodes well for his playing time and perhaps for the organization's confidence in him. So really curious to see what they do at the deadline, because they could be among the teams that trades for Wilson Contreras if he's on the move. And if that were to happen, of course, Bart's playing time would take a major hit in the short term unless he was going back the other way in that trade.
Yeah, he's certainly not a superstar. He's walking 13% of the time this year, which is actually pretty good. So the strikeout rate up, but also the walk rate up. Not always a good thing to go in tandem there. You like to see one or the other. Ruvain, what are your thoughts on Bart?
I think he is the catcher of the future, but he's also learning how to catch a major league pitching staff. So a lot of catchers, when they first come up, especially prospects, they don't do well hitting wise the first couple of years, and they want to just get, the organization wants them to get to know how to catch a pitcher, how to catch a major league staff. And the way the Giants are analytically inclined, there's so much for them to do there that I think he's maybe just being overwhelmed with the catching side a little bit more and putting the hitting to the back. I think the hitting will come. I think it may not be this year. He may even lose playing time if they do get Wilson Contreras, which is a very good possibility. And I do think that he is the catcher of the future, but I think his hitting prowess will probably be shown in like year 2 or 3.
What's your take, Derek, on the fantasy use of Giants hitters? So more than any team, I'd say even more than Tampa Bay, believe it or not, they are straight platooning guys. Like if you go on to Roster Resource, and Roster Resource will generally indicate whether a guy is on a platoon or not. Half the lineup is a platoon. Like we're talking, Lamonte Wade, he's a lefty, Jock Peterson, a lefty, Yastrzemski's a lefty, but then there's the righties, Slater, Yermin Mercedes, Darren Ruff, and they're literally just, if there's a lefty pitcher in the mound, it's one. If there's a righty pitcher in the mound, there's the other. Obviously, this impacts the use of fantasy. Does this limit rostering Giants for you? Because there are some really skilled hitters on the team. How do you deal with using the Giants hitters in fantasy, knowing that they're just platooning the heck out of every single person?
Generally, I try to limit the use of these players to really deep leagues, mostly NL-only leagues. There's always a few exceptions because the way a roster is built, you just can't quite mix and match at every single spot. But I would agree with you. I think they do it as well as any team in the league and about as often as any team in the league. And I think Evan Longoria and Wilmer Flores are the two guys that I probably worry about the least right now. Jock Peterson is kind of close to that level, but still, even in the games where he doesn't start because they're facing a lefty, they're going to get his bat in there. He's going to come into the game later in the game, maybe get 2 plate appearances, depending on how early that is. So you do have to keep that in mind. It's not a strict, doesn't play at all that day, but it is play less than other similarly skilled players. So really, I'm always looking for teams that can't afford to mix and match with certain guys. And even like Brandon Crawford, because of his age, he doesn't have a steady platoon partner, but I think they do try to take a little bit of a workload off of his legs. And because of defensive versatility, or even in some cases, not worrying that much about the quality of their defense, the Giants do chip away at some playing time for some of their older players that way.
Yeah, and I mean, even the catcher. I mean, the catcher doesn't get platoon; they just share time. So literally everybody is doing it. Ruvain, for that, it seems to me that for Giants, they are somewhat streamable. Or when you're looking to make a waiver wire pickups for a league, especially even like NFBC formats where you can change lineups twice a week. Are the Giants a source that you're looking, okay, who's on the mound this week? Are they facing a lot of lefties, a lot of righties? Are you looking at Giants for possible streaming options based on matchups? Is that a consideration for you?
Of course I am, because the Giants know what they're doing. They've figured it out. They know how to get these players, how to get the maximum out of these players. The one player that I really look at, and I was actually going to mention him in the waiver wire later today, was Austin Slater, because Austin Slater, he's part of the platoon, but he's batting .455 because they're putting him in the correct situations where to hit. He's also got 3 stolen bases, so he's a little different than the other platoon guys because he actually steals bases. He has 6 stolen bases on the year, 5 homers and 6 stolen bases. You have that type of profile. That profile, even with the low amount of playing time, it still stands out among a lot of the waiver wires, especially in deeper leagues, because you're not going to get that elsewhere.
Yeah, and Slater also is different in that he leads off. So, even if he's losing a game here and there, but he's batting leadoff, so he's going to get more at-bats than a lot of others. I don't think the Giants are going to really contend for the division this year. Or maybe you do, Derek. I don't know. Do you think that they can hang on to a wild card spot? They're 5 games over 500. Obviously, they were one of the best team in baseball last year with that record, even better than the Dodgers. But are they going to hang on to a wild card spot? According to Fangraphs, it's 50-50 on making the playoffs.
Yeah, I think they are on the short list of teams where the next 10 days really shapes what they decide to do at the deadline. If playoff odds go up, they could become buyers. If they fall, they could move a few pieces. It's a weird team because they've got a handful of guys on the wrong side of 30 that you could see them flipping pretty easily. Obviously Camilo Doval's their primary closer there, but Dominic Leone actually has looked really good this year. Tyler Rogers brings that kind of unique look from the right side. John Brebbia, plenty of teams need relievers, right? So if you can flip relievers for even A-ball prospects, that might be something the Giants decide to do because they can unearth more veterans like that in the offseason. It seems to be a skill that they have as a front office. So I'm really curious to see what happens in these next few weeks. I wonder if they'd even consider moving Carlos Rodon if things break down enough between now and that August 2nd trade deadline.
Yeah, I was going to say, I doubt they're sellers, and if they are, I mean, who are you going to move? Rodon? There's just him, maybe. Buyers, I tend to think that the Giants are going to try to win. They're interested in filling up seats, and every team is interested in that, but their owner is especially interested in filling up seats. So I have to imagine they're going to be buyers, and yes, obviously, if they lose the next 10 games and they fall out of it, that's something else. But I have to imagine that they're gonna make a push for something, even if just to keep pace, right? If right now, according to Fangraphs, they're 50% to make the playoffs, and it doesn't fall that much there, I think because other teams are gonna make trades and better themselves. Don't they feel they have to, right? Do you think that they're gonna make a trade to acquire players, Ruvain?
100%. They're going to make the playoffs. I think they're going to make the playoffs, but I think they want to try to get past the Dodgers. I think that's the sticking point. When they lost to the Dodgers last year, you can't be a San Francisco Giant fan and love the fact that the Dodgers keep winning every year. You just can't. So I think the Giants are going to make a big splash. I actually think that right now the Vegas odds is that Juan Soto is going to go to the Mets. I think the Giants are a dark horse because A, they have the money and they have an owner who's willing to pay for it. They wanted Bryce Harper and they could have got him before. And B, they have a spot for him. There's no one. He can be the franchise player because Buster Posey's gone. He would be the franchise player. He would be the perfect fit, and he'd be the perfect antithesis to whatever the Dodgers do.
So moving on to the San Diego Padres, I actually want to start with something that was talked on the Under the Radar podcast this week. First of all, I want to thank you, Derek, for inviting me on the show to fill in for Nando. Thanks so much for having me. And we talked about Juan Soto being traded, and I think we came to a conclusion with you, me, and Ian. I think Ian was the one who suggested it, that the Padres could be a nice, realistic landing point for Soto, that they probably have the players and package. And we noted that the Mets maybe a little bit less in that they're still trying to form their organization and build up the farm and all that. Funny, I just saw a tweet from Jonathan Papelbon who said, from their agent, Soto wants to come to the Mets. He's going to try to make it work in the Mets, and they're going to try to figure out something. Where do you see this all playing out, and do you think the Padres are a good fit?
Yeah, I think the Padres are a great fit as a trade partner for the Nationals, because if you're the Nationals, if you're in Mike Rizzo's position and you're going to trade a player who is rightfully compared to Ted Williams, which is just an absurd thing to say, but true, you have to get a lot of talent back, and you need a lot of that talent to be near major league ready or currently in the major leagues. And I think the Padres hit that sweet spot where they have two great prospects in the big leagues right now in C.J. Abrams and Mackenzie Gore. And we know with Tatis working his way back from injury, that Abrams is probably going to become an extra player on this roster in the next couple of weeks. And we know with Gore, between innings concerns and the rotation depth that they have, he might be more expendable for San Diego than he'd be for a lot of other teams, right? So those two guys could be the headliners. You could maybe even think about adding Robert Hassel III in that package. And I think you could also start to figure out a way to possibly fix some of the money problems the Padres are having. They're right in the range of the luxury tax. If you are a rebuilding team like the Nationals, you can actually take some salary back as part of a trade, be that Eric Hosmer or Will Myers or whoever that ends up being. That affords the Padres the flexibility they need to try and chase down the Dodgers. I would say just as much as the Giants want to chase down the Dodgers, AJ Preller and the Padres want that too. And they've been able to stay afloat without Tatis to this point. You bring him back and you make an impact trade like that, adding one of the absolute best offensive players in the game. You have him through 2024, so it's not a rental, and maybe you've actually got a shot of extending him. And then you've got this three-player core that's as good as any three position players you can put together in the entire league, and the key then becomes making sure you can replenish your farm system enough to not go the way of a team like the Angels. But I think the Padres have shown us they have the resources in place to find a lot of young talent, right? They're in that group where they can actually afford to give up a lot of young players and still compete in the long run.
Yeah, totally agree. I mean, Machado, Tatis, Soto, that is some middle of the lineup there.
I actually heard an interesting thing on a Padre podcast. They were thinking about trading for Juan Soto, not signing him to a long deal, seeing how this year plays out, and then trade him again in the offseason to restock their farm system. Just so that meaning just having Juan Soto for this year for the playoff run, then trade him to another team and restock their farm system. That's not a crazy idea, because just because you're trading for him, you still have 2 more years of control of Juan Soto. That doesn't necessarily mean that you have to sign him. He's going to want a big contract, but that doesn't mean you have to sign him.
Do you think, Derek, that the trade value is for Soto or for others in general is higher at the trade deadline, or is it higher in the offseason? Like, if the Nationals want to capitalize and get the most value, they certainly don't need to do it in the middle of the season, right? I mean, they're not playing for this year anyways. You know, they're going to play for next year. If they traded in the offseason, it's the same for them as at the deadline. Where do you think the value is higher? Is it the deadline or is it in the offseason?
I think offseason tends to get you more value in a trade, but I think Soto is an exception. Like I think for probably the last 10 trade deadlines, it's been better to be a buyer in terms of what you give up in terms of long-term value versus the value you get even for rental players. I think it's been much better to be in the buyer position. I think Soto is a bit of a unicorn because players this good with control left are rarely available. So I think anytime you put a player like Juan Soto on the block, anyone and everyone is going to go to the mat trying to come up with the best possible offer, right? You're getting a legitimate bidding war regardless of timing, but generally, I think it's still better to be in a trading for players position than a trading players away position at the deadline in season.
Let's talk about Fernando Tatis. Obviously, whoever bought him in the first round is not that thrilled this year. Let's go to Ruvain first. What is Tatis's injury status?
Well, he's still hurt. He's gonna be out for still a while. They did the most recent scan was of his wrist was said to be okay. He's progressed to a hitting progression, but that doesn't mean that he's going to be ready for baseball anytime soon. I think he's still at least a good 4 weeks away, 4 to 5 weeks. Because remember, he didn't have a spring training. He has to get the spring training under his belt also. So I think he's a good 4 to 5 weeks away, and that's even if he comes back at all. Because the way things are going, he's sounding like he's having I hate to say this, but having a Jacob deGrom type season where whenever you think he's going to start going, there's either not necessarily a setback, but something holding him back. And if something's holding him back, he needs to get ramped up. He needs to have game situation. He needs to hit off a tee, which he hasn't done yet. He has so much progression to do. And then what about playing the field? Are they going to have him just as the DH? Are they going to put him in the outfield? Is he going to get reps in the outfield? Get reps at shortstop? There's so many question marks about him. I didn't draft him at all. I had no interest in drafting him just because of the fact that I knew he had this injury and he didn't tell anybody about it until literally almost the last second possible, until he got physical and everything like that. So I'm really nervous about him playing this year. If he comes back, if he plays, you may get a month and a half. Because listen, it's already, when we're taping this, it's July 21st. How much time is left in the baseball season? Another 2.5 months. He hasn't done anything baseball related yet. Maybe he just started the hitting. He's not going to come back for at least another 4 or 5 weeks, in my opinion.
Yeah, I still don't know why he hasn't gone for that shoulder surgery yet. That is weird to me. To me, Tatis the injuries are chronic at this point. It's I'd very, very heavily weight the risk of injury if I'm looking next year and saying, okay, I need a discount to roster him. To me, it's chronic already. For this season, though, Derek, what does a Fernando Tatis fantasy trade look like? If, let's say you have him and he's on your IL, you have him on the roster. What do you think you can actually get for him in return in a trade?
Yeah, if you're thinking about it in the timetable that Ruvain outlined, which I think is reasonable, I mean, you're probably getting a maximum of 6 weeks worth of games. Is he playing every day in our minds if he gets back with 6 weeks to go? Maybe close to it. I think you're probably looking at the equivalent of 6th or 7th round value, which is probably not helpful without actual names on it. But I mean, if you're thinking about shortstops in a straight up 1-for-1 trade, would you rather have Tatis for the rest of the season or Carlos Correa? For me, it's pretty easily Carlos Correa. He's healthy right now, even though his ceiling is nowhere close to what Tatis's is.
What about, by the way, you can also trade him for an outfielder. He's outfielder eligible. What about a guy like Nick Castellanos, who's having a down year? According to the ATC rest of season projections, they project for almost the same dollar amount rest of season. Castellanos 255 at bats, Tatis 150 at bats, but obviously Tatis is better on a per at bat basis. Is that something that you think could pull off a struggling Castellanos for a Tatis to come back late?
I think you could get someone to do that, and I think your willingness to make that move, if you're the person who currently has Tatis on your roster, it probably depends on what's happening with your team right now. If you're in a head-to-head league and you're doing well and you're definitely going to the playoffs and you want the best possible roster for your matchups in September, you might hold Tatis in that situation. If you're in a roto league where this lost time is really hurting you because the drop from Tatis to whoever you're throwing out there right now, Connor Joe, that's just a filler outfielder, the upgrade to Nick Castellanos is probably worth doing as soon as you can possibly do it. So I think that's the other wrinkle. If you have Tatis and you've somehow weathered the storm to this point, you may decide that it's worth waiting it out. But I think generally that's the right level value-wise what you'd be looking for in a return. Nick Castellanos sounds right.
Yeah, and I think that it's more of a situation question than a value question of players. Because you mentioned head-to-head playoffs. If you're a team that is just on the outside of making the playoffs and you have Tatis on your roster, I think you're not going to have any production of him the next month, but you need that production. And a team that's in first place, they probably want Tatis to hold. Oh, I'll hold Tatis. I'll get him the playoffs. You can see it. I can see a trade in that situation where, okay, I'm going to trade you a Tatis who's doing nothing because I need to get in the playoffs, and I'll I'll take a lesser player value-wise, but I need the production now. Like Tatis's value is all backloaded. I need somebody who has the value now. So I can see in certain scenarios where time is a matter, that forcing a trade of Tatis, right? I think that's really the situation that you're looking for.
And if you're in, let's say, 8th or ninth place in a redraft league and you want to make a difference, you want to take that risk. You want to trade that Castellanos for Tatis just in case he can give you that extra push at the end. Because if you're so far behind, you want to add, we always say this, you want to add on more risk to try to get more reward. And this is definitely more risk, especially because if Tatis can even play 3/4 of the games that he plays, the way Castellanos is struggling, I'm sure if you have Castellanos on your bench, you've probably been tempted to bench him a couple of times. And if you're willing to do that, then you should be willing to trade for Tatis.
Yeah, in a roto league, you can if you're out of the money and you have someone of a higher value, you can trade him because Tatis has the more upside. Of course, it's all about playing time, but I think that the playoff situation is really where you're going to see a Tatis trade. You mentioned Connor Joe, and let's go to the Colorado Rockies. Connor Joe looks really good early on. He had 129 WRC plus in March and April, went down to 80 in May. He bounced back in June with a 120 and back down to 76 in July. His barrel rate is a measly 4%, even with Colorado. His ground ball rate has gone up from 33 to 44% this year. What are your expectations for Connor Joe, and what formats, Derek, do you think that he should be rostered in fantasy?
Oh, I think he's really the kind of guy I would like to have in NL only, and I don't really want to have in mixed leagues because, like many Colorado hitters, the power is just not where you trust it outside of Coors. And it's weird. Of the 5 home runs he's hit this year, 4 have come on the road. I think that's just a fluke. I just think this is maybe the classic example of a player who is constantly making adjustments because of the stark contrast between his home park and the road, or even coming back home and just seeing how things move so differently, how pitches move differently between those environments. So I think if you put Connor Joe in a non-Colorado situation, I would expect a decent average, a good OBP, 10 to 12 home runs, and counting stats that really ride on where he hits in the order. I think in Colorado, maybe you can get a few extra homers, but I just think it's going to be a really bumpy road throughout the second half, even if you believe in that baseline set of numbers I'm putting out there.
Your thoughts, Ruben?
Connor Joe, he's an enigma. When you had him early in the year, you couldn't not play him, and now you have to put him on your bench. His last home run, June 7th. I did a deep dive on him. He's batting .391 in 92 at bats with no shift against him. With a shift against him, he's batting .291, so it's a 100-point difference. His K rate has gone up from June and July. His BABIP has changed 150 points down from June and July. So he's been a little bit unlucky, but if you're playing in Colorado and you haven't hit a home run since June, he's a guy that if you have him on your roster, he should be the last guy on your roster, and you should be willing to drop him for almost anyone on the waiver wire.
The thing is that the Rockies are actually putting him in every single day in the leadoff spot. I mean, they're just continuing to roll with him. It's kind of weird. I think that mono leagues, you're going to be rostering him because he's leading off. And 15-team mixed leagues, maybe depending upon how bad your injuries are. He should be rostered. I don't know if you should play him, but he should be rostered in 15-team mixed, I think. Playing, I think it really depends on matchups and stuff like that. Anything deeper, he should be rostered. The Rockies have an interesting situation with their catchers. They have huge home road splits. Elias Diaz, he's batting .252 at home, .204 on the road. Brian Serven is batting .313 at home, 154 away. His WRC plus, look at the difference, 146 at home. So he's a monster at home, and I kid you not, 5 away. That means he's 95% worse than the average player away. Question is, Derek, in terms of fantasy play, is streaming Rockies catchers a viable situation when you see they're playing home? Like, I know in certain leagues, depends upon your injuries and who you have there, or definitely in one catcher shallow leagues, I'm always looking to stream. are these two decent options to stream in, let's say, a 15-team or 12 to 15-team mixed league?
Maybe in a 15, but I think they're sharing the role in a way that doesn't really make them even useful streamers. I think if this playing time tilted more in one favor, then we'd be looking at a situation where you could use them more often. So I've been staying away for the most part outside of mono leagues. I mean, I think those splits are probably even more extreme than they'll end up being at the end of the season, just because we're dealing with 3-ish months worth of playing time. I don't think Servin was even on the big league roster to start the year. So not much separating these two guys right now. I think I like Diaz just a little bit more from a core skills perspective.
Yeah, two catcher leagues that are 15-team mixed and deeper. I've been streaming, so I've had weeks where I've picked them up and let's go ahead and play them. That's about the limit. Your thoughts, Ruben?
Well, he's so bad. Servin is so bad that we actually have him on our NFBC team, and we actually still have him, but we picked up a Salvador Perez to sit on our bench just to wait because we know how bad Servin is. You can stream him if it's a daily league. Just see who's in the lineup that day and just keep churning that way, because that would be great. But I think in the long run, if for a weekly league, I don't think they're rosterable. I think there are better options out there.
And before we talk more about the Rockies, it's time for the Injury Gurus Trivia of the Week.
Well, continuing to talk about the Rockies, we're going to talk about the Rockies pitching staff now. So my trivia this week is a little bit different than what I normally do. I'm going to name a starting pitcher, and you're going to tell me if they have a higher WAR, according to Fangraphs as of today, if they have a higher WAR than the entire Rockies bullpen combined.
Okay.
Okay. I'm going to name a pitcher and tell me if they've higher WAR than the entire Rockies bullpen combined. Let's start with Logan Webb.
Yeah, yes, I think Webb's WAR is higher.
I'll go with yes.
The answer is yes. Martin Perez.
Also a yes.
Yeah, he's a yes.
That's a yes. Garrett Cole.
Probably still a yes, even though that feels tricky to me for some reason.
Yeah, I feel like you're trying to trick us, but I'll stay with yes.
You're right. I'm trying to trick you. It's actually lower than the Rockies combined bullpen. Tarek Skubal.
Skubal, I think, is over that number too. So I'll say slight over on Skubal because he started off the season pitching really well.
I'll also go with yes.
Yes, well, Skubal actually raised his WAR 0.1 today with his win. And just to give you to tell you what's going on with them, Logan Webb, 2.5 WAR. Martin Perez, 2.4 WAR. Tarek Skubal is now at 2.5. Garrett Cole, 2.2, which means the Rockies' bullpen combined WAR for this year is 2.3. Yikes. That is horrible. That is really bad. That's one of the lowest bullpen WARs in all of baseball. I don't know how you can roster any of these guys. I don't know how any team in the playoff hunt can even want one of these guys in the trade. So, Derek, do you think any pitcher on the Rockies, starter or reliever, are worth rostering for the end of the year?
Generally, no. I think you can get away with using some of their starters on the road in certain spots. If you want to talk, German Marquez into your lineup in a pitcher-friendly environment, I'm not going to talk you out of it. Maybe Chad Kuhl in a handful of spots. I wonder if any of their depth arms end up getting moved, and if that happens, then maybe they become more interesting. If you put Robert Stevenson in a contender's bullpen, I might trust him in some high-leverage spots. There's a handful of interesting names, but it's just tough sledding in Colorado.
Yeah, in terms of the bullpen, Bard has 20 saves this year. He has a 2 ERA, so he's been good. Are you in general staying away from the Rockies bullpen? Obviously, if you have Bard, you're going to own him. He's not going to be available in most leagues. But I mean, there's nobody to speculate on here, right? You'd avoid this situation, right?
I would wait until they make a move because it doesn't even sound like they want to trade Daniel Bard. I saw a report they want to extend him, and they could easily just share the handful of save opportunities they get between 2 or 3 different relievers, and given the ratio risk, shaky skills, difficulty of the park, it's an easy situation for me to stay away from, at least initially upon the trade deadline arriving.
And you mentioned Chad Kuhl. Chad Kuhl's ERA for the year is 4.11. His xFIP is 4.86. So even when you're doing well, it doesn't necessarily mean that you're meant to do well. That if you look at all the ERAs on the bullpen, whether starter or the relievers are a little bit better, but the starters, I mean, how can you even want anyone? Maybe you get Kyle Freeland because he can go deep into games and you can get maybe a win out of him, even though his record is 4-7. He stays in games long enough to get a decision. So of all the pitchers, I think maybe Kyle Freeland. I don't think he's gonna get traded, but I think he's a guy. If you want to stream, has a history of pitching well at Coors. This was a couple of years ago, and he did, and it was an anomaly. It was like one of those Ubaldo Jimenez type things. It was an anomaly, but if you want to stream someone, I think the best guy to stream would be Kyle Freeland.
Chad Kuhl has a home road split. He's ERA at home is 4.70, on the road 3.52. So Kuhl is interesting. Should you steer clear of all Rockies pitchers at home? And I'd say Rockies pitchers, period. The only thing is that, as Ruben said, they do tend to go deep into games. But, this is the other thing I'd say is that in a points league, because they go deep into game, then the Rockies pitchers become interesting if your point structure is that they reward innings more than strikeouts, right? I know like Tout Wars head-to-head, points are given a lot to the innings. So I picked up German Marquez, I picked up Freeland here and there if I think they're going to last long because, if they last 6 innings, I get 18 points and there isn't a lot of strikeouts. You're better off with a long innings, low strikeout guy than the reverse. So maybe in a points league format. But in Roto, are you rostering anybody at any point? Like in a 15-team league, NFBC format, Derek, if they're on their waiver wire, are you saying, oh, yeah, let's stream German Marquez, let's stream Freeland?
Only on the road and really only Marquez in those formats. Skills-wise, still averaging 95 on the fastball. He's got 2 breaking balls, throws the occasional changeup. I just want to know what would happen at this point. I know he's not quite the pitcher he was at his peak. The stuff is slowly beginning to break down. The Rockies need to make a decision here because if they hold Marquez too long, if they wait until the last year of that team-friendly deal, the value is going to be mostly gone. There may still be teams that are desperate for starting pitching, especially controllable pitching, who believe they can make Marquez a mid-threes ERA guy who could possibly be a sneakily available number 1 starter that doesn't necessarily fetch a typical number 1 starter price via trade.
Yeah. Let's move on to the Los Angeles Dodgers, and let's start with you, Ruvain. Walker Buehler, what is his injury status, timetable, and so on and so forth?
Walker Buehler is actually currently shut down, and he's going to be shut down for quite a while. He was supposed to be shut down for about a month or so, and then after that, we'll see. Then he has to start ramping up and make sure he doesn't have any setbacks. And pitchers with setbacks happen all the time. Again, I'm going back to Jacob deGrom. He was pushed back again. He was supposed to possibly start over the weekend or maybe beginning of next week. He was pushed back again. Pitchers are very fickle creatures. They're creatures of habit. If they don't get what they're supposed to do, if they don't fit the certain mold, you have a problem. And Walker Buehler is out of that right now. He's not doing his normal pitching stuff, which means he has to ramp up, which means that even if he ramps up, you may be able to get maybe a half a month out of him, maybe a full month. Is he going to start like he starts like he normally does, 6 innings, 7 innings? I don't think so because he has to build up for it. So is it even worth having him on your roster right now? If you have a playoff team, then and you're in the playoffs, then you hold on to him. But for a head-to-head, but otherwise, I don't see a reason to hold on to him. You're not going to get that much value out of him.
Yeah. Other than mono leagues, do you agree, Derek, that he should be dropped?
Yeah, I don't think there's any guarantee we see Buehler pitch again during the regular season. It really could be a ramp up right before the playoffs if we even get that at all.
Right. Tony Gonsolin having a great year. Should you be worried about his All-Star game performance? And in any case, what do you think his value is rest of the year? And can he do this in the future?
So I would not be all that worried about the All-Star game. But I think with Tony Gonsolin, we've all been pretty skeptical of anything close to the level he's maintained to this point. A sub-3 ERA, sub-1 WHIP, ridiculously good record, too. I think he's 11-0 entering the second half, which is just weird. And we know how fluky wins can be. I think if I'm looking at Gonsolin for the rest of the season, he's probably a top 40 starting pitcher because of the team context. If you're going to be really aggressive with this value, I do wonder if Gonsolin's the kind of player that, because many people playing fantasy are going to look at him and say, he's kind of my extra guy. My pitching is good. I hit on a late Gonsolin pickup or an early season Gonsolin pickup. Maybe I can actually trade him and someone else can deal with all the regression. And you might actually get a deal done. I just think as long as when you're making a move to get Gonsolin, you're expecting a 3.70 ERA and a 1.20 WHIP with a little less than a strikeout per inning. I think if that's where you expect the results to be the rest of the way, you won't be disappointed.
Ruvain, he's thrown a career-high 93 innings this year. Are you worried about a possible shutdown?
Yes, 100%, and I was actually going to mention that because the most innings he's pitched for a season, minors and majors, is 128 combined innings. He's at 93, which means he will probably hit the wall. He's always been used as a piggyback, as a short start, but now they're stretching him out. They're getting as much as they can out of him, but he's been extremely lucky. He has a BABIP of 197. That's very lucky. That there's going to be some regression there. Even Jake Arrieta back in 2015, when he had an ERA of 1.77, had a BABIP of 246. So I think the BABIP, if the BABIP changes, his luck's going to change, and there's going to be regression. And this is the typical buy low, sell high. This is the guy you want to sell high right now. You can get the most value out of him in a trade. And just Derek, you mentioned it. This is like the fourth or fifth pitcher on your roster to begin with. If you can get any value or a lot of value out of him, this is a perfect time to trade him because there will be regression.
Yeah. I don't think he's going to be shut down. I mean, the Dodgers are going to be in the playoffs, but you can definitely see skip starts and the volume that he's been pitching at, the paces, that has to change for him. I can't see this happening. And, of course, he's obviously not this good. His BABIP is 197 this year. I mean, a regular BABIP is like 290. He's 100 points lower than a regular BABIP. That's crazy. So, you got to expect regression. But, the volume also, the pace is going to be going lower. All right, before we go on to some of our waiver wire and players like that, just anybody want to throw out some NL West predictions? I predict the Dodgers will win their division. It's pretty not bold. I will say that the Padres will... I will say that the Giants will pass the Padres. I'll make a bold prediction. Giants will pass the Padres in the standings. I'm not going to say if one will make the playoffs or not, but I'll just say that they'll flip by the end of the year. What about you, Derek?
If the Padres are the winners of the Juan Soto sweepstakes, then I think they end up taking second in the division. If they can't get deals done to get significant upgrades between now and August 2nd, I think you're right. So I think a ton hinges on this deadline. I just think the window is open right now for San Diego. So that's why I'm so confident they're going to do something. Even if it's not Soto, they're going to go out and get an impact player or two and really try and make a run at it. So I think they're going to be more aggressive than the Giants. The way they were playing before the break, though, does put them closer to the can't go all in sort of bubble that I'd like them to be.
Yeah. What you said earlier about, them unloading Myers or Hosmer for the money, I can totally see that. I can totally see, all right, you could take Abrams, but, no problem, but you're going to have to take a contract. And so you're probably limited, or it's more likely to go to a team that has some money to take on. Right? Okay, well, we'll take on this contract. We'll also take your prospects, and then you get our star player. Right? I can see that kind of trade really happen. Ruvain, any predictions?
I actually agree with your bold prediction. I think the Giants will pass the Padres. I think the Giants will finish in second and make the playoffs. And I think the Padres will miss the playoffs. How about that? I actually think that the Giants will make a big splash. They made a big splash last year. They got Chris Bryant. People heard of it, but no one really thought of it until it actually started happening. So I think the Giants are going to make a big splash, which is why I still think Juan Soto's on their radar, even though everyone's not really so, talking about it that much. I think Juan Soto is a better fit in San Francisco than he is in San Diego. Yes, the Padres have more people to trade for him, but I think the Padres are going to use their chips and they're just going to, run with what they have. But I don't think they're going to make the playoffs. That's my bold prediction.
So, Derek, I know we talked a little bit about this one on the Athletic podcast, but what is the likelihood of Juan Soto actually getting traded this year? I think it's far less than 50-50.
I think it's somewhere in the 30 to 40% range right now, just simply because the Nationals don't have to do it. They have time on their side. If they don't like the offers they're getting in season, there might be a few other teams that aren't thinking about trading for him at the moment that will think about things very differently in the light of a full offseason reshuffle, right? Even though it's not a long-term commitment by making the trade because you have 2 years of control, it's a significant amount of money for smaller market teams that might not be able to take on a $17 million player in season, right? So 30 to 40% for now, and we'll have to wait and see if anything heats up here in these next couple weeks.
Do you think Scott Boras will try to push it at all, because he has a lot of connections and he is Juan Soto's agent? Do you think Scott Boras will stick his hand in there and try to push a trade?
I don't know if he really has any leverage at the moment, but I think that's one of the interesting things about Steven Strasburg having 10-5 rights is if a team like the Mets were going to get involved, one of the things they could do is say, we'll take on any contracts you want us to take on because money doesn't matter to us, if that's how they feel about it. But then you're giving a ton of leverage to Boras in that situation because he could then say, well, Strasburg won't go here, 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 and here. But I think that favors the Mets since the Mets have very deep pockets.
Let's talk waiver wire. What are one or two players that you think that we should be looking at to pick up this week? Let's start with you, Derek.
Akil Baddoo is still pretty interesting to me. People liked him a lot back during draft season. The Tigers gave him that pretty quick demotion back to AAA. He went down, actually played really well, showed power, showed speed, showed good plate skills, had a really nice slash line. I think it was a 300, 400, 500 line with Toledo. He's still just 23 years old. And I think the success he had last year gives me some confidence that he can continue to make adjustments at the big league level. And I expect Robbie Grossman to be among the veteran players dealt, which opens up a lot of playing time in the outfield. So Akil Baddoo is just one of those guys that people have sort of forgotten about, and I like what he was doing during that time in the minors.
Good stuff, Ruven.
I actually have three players. I already mentioned Austin Slater, so he's only 19% owned in CBS. He's batting .455 recently, and he with three stolen bases, so he's batting 303 on the year. I think he's a guy if you need an extra outfielder and you must take an outfielder and you don't want to roster Connor Joe, I think Austin Slater is a good option. Another guy I want to mention, Dan Vogelbach. He's only 10% owned in CBS. He's batting .228, but he has 12 homers. If your team needs power, he will probably be traded. There have been already rumors that he's going to go to the Mets. If he does get traded and he goes to a better lineup, his average may stay the same, but you'll still get a lot of power out of him. And I think a better situation for him will be a lot more conducive to better stats for him as well. Another guy I want to mention is Ramon Urias of Baltimore. He was batting .224 on July 4th. But in the last week, he's batted .417 with 2 homers. He's got his batting average up to .255, 9 homers, and 31 RBIs for the season. He's only 16% owned in CBS leagues. I think he's a better option even in deeper leagues instead of, let's say, a Jose Iglesias, who's just an empty average. So he's eligible at shortstop and second base. I think he's a great option.
By the way, I'm sticking with my bold prediction of Trey Mancini to the Mets. I know Baltimore's been hot, but it's like the perfect fit. I think that's going to happen, and you'll see Dom Smith out of here. I think the Mets need a DH. Kyle Finnegan, is he the closer right now? If so, he's only 20% owned, and I know Washington's not great, but I think he's the guy. So Kyle Finnegan probably should be a little bit more owned than 20%. If he's available in your league, I would give a look. Carson Kelly, he's been up and down. He's now up. In the last 30 days, he's batting .304 with 4 homers. Especially in a 2-catcher league, Carson Kelly is probably under-owned. He's 20% owned on CBS. Give him a look. And I'll also mention Jose Iglesias. It's a streaming play. A lot of home games next week. He's only 15% owned, and he's a 300 hitter. If you need a little bit of boost in average, he's definitely the guy. So just take a look at him. Pitcher preview. Derek, who's a pitcher that you are interested in picking up, either for the long term or for the immediate coming scoring period?
So the longer term, like deep league guys that I'm looking at right now, Braxton Garrett is still pretty interesting to me. I know he's been scooped up in a lot of NFBC leagues in the last couple of weeks, but he's showing consistently good command and just Doesn't seem like for a young pitcher he's anywhere near his innings cap for the season, so I think he'll continue to get lots of opportunities in Miami. Great park to stream in, so I think he's really interesting. And looking a little bit deeper, I just think with the Chris Sale injury, the latest Chris Sale injury, Cutter Crawford, we talked about him a little bit under the radar. Just a good deep arsenal of pitches, probably a better pitcher than the surface numbers would lead us to believe in the upper levels of the minor leagues. I think the Red Sox might be limping through the second half, looking for quality innings if they don't find a way to add some innings at the deadline. I know they got James Paxton working his way back, but I think Crawford is a little bit of a sleeper here for these next few weeks.
I'm not kidding you. Those were actually the two people I was actually going to mention. The Crawford one, though, might have been influenced since we talked about it on the other show. But Crawford, the only issue with him is that he does walk a lot of players. So just be careful of that. And Braxton Garrett has two good matchups. He's playing Cincinnati twice in the next two starts. Cincinnati, not a great team, and he strikes at about a strikeout per inning. We talk about in the show that if you're going to get a guy, if he has a decent enough strikeout rate, probably a decent shot. If it goes wrong, at least you get the strikeout. So there you go. The other guy I'll throw in, JT Brubaker. He has a lot of strikeouts. Every time I look at any league for, all right, who's gotten the most strikeouts lately, who's at the top of the list, it's always Brubaker. And again, he's not a guy that you would normally throw. If the matchup is good, he's very, very interesting. And if you're not concerned about ratios, if the strikeouts are a bigger deal and wins doesn't matter, Brubaker is an option. I think it's really context dependent on where your team is in the standings, in the categories, but Brubaker is definitely somebody who could be a fit, and he's widely available. Ruvain?
I was looking at all the starting pitchers. Nothing really thrilled me there, so I did what I normally do. I start looking at the relievers and see who's available there, because if you don't like anything that's out there, you don't have to necessarily force the issue and sometimes just go for the reliever. You'll have a better chance of getting better ratios. So I'm going to mention the trio of relievers from Tampa Bay. Colin Poche, or Poche, I'm not sure how you pronounce it, Brooks Raley, and Jason Adams. They have been splitting. They are the three-headed monster right now, the horses in the stable for the Tampa Bay Rays. Poche, all of them have great ratios for ERA and WHIP. Poche has six saves so far this year. He's only 21% owned in CBS. Brooks Raley also has 6 saves. He's only 10% owned in CBS. Jason Adams has 4 saves, and he's 16% owned in CBS. So if you can't stomach the JT Brubaker because you're worried about that blow-up, those are the 3 guys you can just stick in there. You may not necessarily get saves, but they're going to help your ratios, and they may even get you a save.
Good stuff. Anybody else that we're missing? Either a hitter or a pitcher, just to throw it out there?
Dustin May, I think, is quietly making his way back toward the big leagues. He's going to go through several rehab starts. It's probably going to be about mid-August when he's back, but he's an impact guy in a lot of leagues when healthy. So depending on how your league tends to handle players like this, just a name that you want to keep in mind for a pickup a week or two before he's back at least. All
right, let's go to Ruvain's injury update. Are you starting with DeGrom, who's pushed back?
No, I mentioned him already, so I'm not going to mention it again because it's killing me that he's not coming back. But it's just very frustrating. But yes, he was pushed back because he felt some soreness. He's still going to have his day to throw in a couple of days, and hopefully maybe at the end of next week you'll see him in a major league. This is why I actually said when he first started doing his rehab starts that maybe they should have his rehabs in the majors, because you don't want to waste those innings. If he's healthy, don't waste those innings because you don't know if you're going to ever get them in the majors.
Yeah, well, why do they do that? Like, I mean, he's throwing the same inning. He's still throwing 100 miles an hour. Why don't they just put him in and, all right, here's a 2-inning stint to be the reliever? Like,
I think the reason is because he never had a full spring training. I think that's the only reason why they did that. If he pitched to start the season, then got hurt, and then started coming back, I think they would have done it. Plus, they don't necessarily need him now, which is bad for us fantasy owners. They're saving him for when they really need him down the stretch and possibly playoff time. So I think that's probably the reason why.
Sorry to interrupt this, but like, Derek, do you have any thoughts on this? Like, why, forget about like low-level guys, but elite guys, DeGrom, Scherzer, like, why in the world are they doing rehab? It's not like they're trying out new pitches, and especially if they're throwing almost max, if they're throwing like 98, 99, if they're throwing a 3-inning stint, why not just do it in the majors and just, be a long man? Like, why do teams do that?
Yeah, maybe early in the rehab stint, you're just worried about roster management beyond that because you're not going to rush the timetable for someone going through that, you're going to still want them to be on a schedule of going like a starter, even if they're not working like a starter. But at the end of the rehab assignment, there might be a case for that. I mean, the thing I keep thinking about when I look at Jacob deGrom right now, his fastball velocity was up every single year starting in 2016 through last season. And as fun as that is, I'm just not sure that that's a good trend for a 6-year window. I don't think that really works.
Yeah, I mean, it's just unbelievable. You sometimes you see a jump, one-time jump 2 miles an hour, but that's just like a 2 mile an hour jump every single year. It's mind-boggling, and obviously he hasn't been able to be healthy. All right, Ruvain, continue, please. Sorry for the interruption there.
Not a problem. We mentioned Steven Strasburg earlier in the episode. He's dealing with a stress reaction in his ribs, and reports have been saying that he's basically done for the year. So if you still have him on your roster, you could probably get rid of him. You're not going to get any much of fantasy value out of him. Mike Trout was placed on the 10-day IL. It was postdated. It was predated. So he is possibly able to come back. He hasn't played since July 12th. He's able to come back the second game out of the All-Star break, so it is very possible that he will be out, and they just wanted him to rest, and that's why they put him on the IL. Dominic Smith hit the IL with ankle inflammation. He rolled his ankle in Chicago in the last series before the All-Star break. You may see more playing time for Luis Guillorme, J.D. Davis. Luis Guillorme, he's maybe an empty average, but it's still a batting average. J.D. Davis, it's more for power upside, but he hasn't really been doing that much either. Mitch Haniger, a guy who should be on everyone's radar. He is currently on a rehab assignment. He just started it. Jerry Dipoto has actually said sometime over the next 2 to 3 weeks, we should have Mitch back in our major league fold. So he will be back within 2 to 3 weeks. This is according to Jerry Dipoto. Lance McCullers, another guy who may have value, also is starting a rehab assignment. He's starting it tomorrow, actually, Friday. He's going to start his rehab assignment. He's supposed to throw 2 innings. We'll see how that goes. I don't know how much value you're going to get out of him. I don't know how much they're going to be able to stretch him out, but that's just something to keep an eye on. Juan Yepes has a grade 2 strain of his forearm. He's going to be out for at least for a while. Corey Dickerson, Lars Nootbaar may see additional playing time. Another guy I just want to mention who may be on someone's radar, we mentioned him in a prospect episode a couple weeks ago, Austin Martin. He has a wrist injury. There's no real diagnosis yet for his injury, but it's not season ending. But what that means is if you have him in a redraft league, he is probably not going to be called up this year.
All right, and that will do it for our show. I want to thank our guest today, Derek Van Riper from The Athletic, for joining. Derek, thanks so much for coming on, and why don't you just tell everyone what's going on with you, where we can find you, reach you, and listen to all your fantastic stuff that you do.
Yeah, thanks for having me on, guys, and thanks for joining us on Under the Radar on Wednesday, Ariel. The easiest way to follow my work is just to follow me on Twitter, at Derek Van Riper. There's no numbers, no underscores, nothing strange like that. Pretty straightforward handle. Many shows per week right now, Rates and Barrels, the Athletic Fantasy Baseball Podcast, and the Athletic Baseball Show. So if you like baseball outside of the realm of fantasy, I'm a part of that show as well.
Amazing work. Definitely one of the best hosts, and you just do this on a daily basis and produce fantastic stuff. You're also very aesthetically nice to listen to. You got a nice, refreshing voice, and so it's always a pleasure to listen to you. And I listen to you multiple podcasts a week. So thank you for brightening our days with that.
Anything I can do to help, right? It's tough out there.
Yeah. No rain out where you are, but you still produce good stuff. Ruvain, what about you?
You can follow me on Twitter at MLB Injury Guru, where I tweet out injury updates as they come. I also have a weekly article on Rotobowler that comes out usually on Saturday, discussing all the injuries I mentioned on the show, plus many others, who will be up next and how long the players will be out for.
And by the way, Derek's also a fantastic fantasy baseball player. Always does fantastic in expert leagues, and that should be noted. Great podcaster and good player. Good player, too. I'm Ariel Cohen. You can read my stuff over at Fangraphs and over at Rotoballer. ATC Rest season projections. I'm hoping the guys at Fangraphs turn on the lights soon because the numbers are out there, and that'll be interesting. We've never done a rested season projection before. Took a little while to get some credibility and perfect the method, and it won't be as credible as the preseason ones, but hoping that they'll be meaningful. You can listen to me right here on the Beat the Shift podcast, and of course follow me on Twitter at ATCNY. No numbers, no dashes, no anything either. All right. Once again, thank you so much to Derek Van Riper for joining us on today's episode. And from all of us here at Beat the Shift, we'll see you next time.
Thanks for listening to the Beat the Shift podcast presented by Fangraphs. Follow us on Twitter at beat_shift_pod.